Okay, let's unpack this. This deep dive focuses on a case that didn't just shock the UK. It really became a genuine national moment of reckoning.
It absolutely did.
We are examining the murder of Sarah Everard, a tragedy that didn't just expose a horrific crime, but I think fundamentally fractured public trust in the institutions meant to protect us.
This is so much more than just a criminal timeline. It's a pivotal event that forced a really uncomfortable national conversation about women's safety, the culture of policing, and, the catastrophic failures of internal vetting systems.
Yeah.
When we look at the source material, the depth of that institutional collapse is, frankly, alarming.
The core facts are brutal and, in their horror, incredibly simple. On the evening of the 3rd of March 2021, 33-year-old marketing executive Sarah Everard was kidnapped while walking home in South London. Her killer was an off-duty Metropolitan Police constable named Wayne Kizens. That much is widely known.
But the truly defining, shocking aspect of this crime, and I think the reason it created such a profound societal scar, is how Cousins carried out the abduction.
Yeah.
He didn't rely on brute force or, typical ambush tactics. He exploited the single most fundamental relationship of trust in civil society.
The trust between the public and a police officer.
Exactly. He used his office as a weapon.
He literally identified himself as a police officer, showed his warrant card, and used his handcuffs to detain her.
And the trial judge later concluded that Cousins almost certainly used the guise of a legitimate arrest, probably claiming that Everard was breaching the really stringent COVID-19 guidelines that were in place at the time.
That is the ultimate betrayal, isn't it?
Yeah.
He weaponized the very badge meant to symbolize safety and then used a global health crisis as his cover.
The abuse of the office of constable in that singular moment is why this deep dive is so necessary.
Yeah.
It's the reason this case can't be viewed merely as a terrible, isolated incident.
So our mission today is pretty comprehensive. For you, the curious learner, we're not just going to recite the incident. We're going to unpack the painstaking investigation that tracked Cousins, the severe legal proceedings that followed.
And most critically, we'll spend extensive time detailing the systemic failures, all those red flags that were missed across multiple police forces, as laid out in the detailed Angelini inquiry.
We'll also analyze the profound societal and political response that followed. Our source material gives us a really granular look at the before, the during, and the institutional fallout.
So I think a good place to start is with the people involved.
To begin, let's establish the context of the two central figures in this tragedy, starting with Sarah Everard, who was, simply living her life in London.
Sarah Everard was, by all accounts, a vibrant, talented young woman. She was born in Surrey in 1987, grew up in York, and attended Fulford School.
And she went to a top university.
She did. She pursued higher education at Durham University, studying human geography from 2005 to 2008. At the time of her death, she was really established in her career, working as a marketing executive for a digital media agency and living in the Brixton Hill area.
Just a normal, successful life.
Exactly. She was, by all accounts, exactly where she wanted to be.
And then we turn to Wayne Cousins, a man whose desire to enter law enforcement was persistent, almost unnerving, despite a highly unconventional path to the Met.
Cousins' background is absolutely essential because it highlights the initial cracks in the vetting process right from the start. He was born in Dover, Kent, in 1972, and originally worked as a mechanic in his family's garage.
And his early attempts to join the police were not successful.
Not at all. They were riddled with failures. After enlisting in the Territorial Army in 2002, he applied to be a police officer 3 times over 4 years.
And was unsuccessful each time.
Yes. Unsuccessful. He failed multiple times, yet still found a route in eventually.
So what were those early roles? How did he get his foot in the door?
He managed to serve briefly as a special constable with Kent Police in 2006. But then, significantly, he was discharged from the Territorial Army in 2007.
For what reason?
For failing to fulfill his training obligations. Now, that should have been a very early, very bright red flag on his service record.
But it clearly didn't stop him.
No, it didn't prevent his continued pursuit of a uniformed role at all.
So he keeps searching for the uniform. Where did he go after Kent Police?
In early 2011, he resigned from Kent Police and joined the Civil Nuclear Constabulary, the CNC.
And what does the CNC do?
They guard civil nuclear sites, so he became an authorized firearms officer. This gave him significant responsibility and authority.
Okay, so he's got firearms training, a uniform, and from there he makes the jump to the Met.
Yes. Crucially, he transferred to the Metropolitan Police Service, the Met, in September 2018.
Now, once he got into the Met, he was quickly accelerated into a highly sensitive role. correct?
Absolutely. Within less than 2 years, in February 2020, he was assigned to the Parliamentary and Diplomatic Protection Branch, the PADP.
Which is a very high-profile division.
Incredibly. It's responsible for the uniform protection of key government and diplomatic premises, a role of extremely high trust.
And here is where our source material flags a colossal failure in oversight that the later Angelini inquiry would just hammer home.
Precisely. We know that Kazins had not undergone the enhanced vetting procedures necessary for such a sensitive role when he joined PADP.
He hadn't, for diplomatic protection.
No. And what's more, he hadn't even completed the mandatory 2-year probation period required by the Met before he was handed this sensitive position.
So the system was essentially fast-tracking a person who should have been under the deepest scrutiny.
That's it, exactly. This omission is really the foundation upon which the subsequent disaster was built.
It sets the stage for a perpetrator who possessed both the means and, I guess, the institutional permission to carry out his crime. Let's shift now to the grim timeline of the abduction and murder itself, detailing the meticulous steps Kazins took.
The crime was highly premeditated, there's no doubt about that. Days before the incident, on the 28th of February 2021, Kazins booked a white Vauxhall Crossland hire car from a company in Dover.
The hire car is a key detail.
It is. The use of a rental car immediately established a layer of separation from his personal vehicle and his official capacity. It suggests detailed planning to avoid detection.
And March 3rd? It started as a normal workday for him.
It did. Kazins finished a 12-hour shift at the U.S. Embassy in London at 7 a.m. He then traveled to Kent to collect that hire car, drove it back to London, and was tracked driving through various locations. He ultimately reached Clapham at 9:23 p.m. He was cruising, seemingly hunting for a target.
And at the same time, Sarah Everard leaves her friend's house near Clapham Junction, just walking home along the A205 South Circular Road.
Yeah, she was just engaging in the mundane, trusting routine of walking home. She was on the phone with her boyfriend for about 15 minutes.
Which means she was occupied, maybe slightly less aware of her surroundings.
Possibly, yes, making her a potentially easier target for someone looking to initiate a quick, deceptive interaction. She was last seen on camera near Pointers Road at 9:28 p.m.
Then, at 9:34 p.m., the moment of abduction.
Kazins had parked his hired Vauxhall on the pavement outside Pointers Court. He stopped Everard, displayed his warrant card, the ultimate symbol of his authority, and handcuffed her.
And this is where the COVID pretext comes in.
It's the only logical explanation. The judge's later summation that he used the excuse of a COVID violation is widely accepted as the only reason why a 33-year-old woman would willingly submit to being detained by a stranger, even a police officer. He utilized the prevailing fear and restrictions of the pandemic.
The audacity of it. And then, ironically, it's public transport infrastructure that helps track him.
Absolutely. The car and the two figures were captured twice by bus CCTV moments later at 21.35 and 21.38. This footage confirmed the car's number plate and placed them together in that location.
And he immediately drove out of London.
Straight toward Kent. By 11:43 p.m., they were in Dover.
And the decision to transfer her into his personal vehicle, the seat, that speaks volumes about his need for operational security.
It really highlights the calculated nature of the crime. The hire car was used for the risky phase, the public abduction, and then quickly exchanged for his personal car for the hidden, deeper phase of the crime.
Right.
It is believed he raped her sometime between midnight and 1:45 a.m. on the 4th of March. Then, chillingly, at 2:34 a.m., we see him performing a completely normal action, purchasing drinks at a Dover petrol station.
And the court concluded he had already committed murder by that point.
Yes, using his police duty belt to strangle her.
Wow.
The cause of death was confirmed as compression of the neck, carried out, shockingly, with a piece of equipment central to his professional identity. Immediately after, the disposal attempts began.
Which took him to land he already owned.
Yes. Kazins drove to Hodeswood, near Ashford, where he owned a small plot of land. His car was captured on CCTV in the area between 3:22 a.m. and 6:32 a.m.
So the first phase of disposal was probably just hiding the body.
Likely. He then began actively trying to erase his movements, returning the hire car to Dover at 8:26 a.m., and then driving his personal vehicle to Sandwich, in Kent, where he disposed of Everard's mobile phone in a watercourse at 9:21 a.m.
This entire sequence, it's all documented.
Irrefutably. Through automatic number plate recognition, ANPR, phone records, and CCTV, the police had a timeline of his meticulous criminality.
The complexity of the cover-up, attempted by Cousins really reveals the kind of forensic cat-and-mouse game the investigation had to play.
It does, and even as he was covering his tracks, he was trying to put distance between himself and his responsibilities.
How so?
In the days immediately following the murder, Cousins made an early attempt to create an official escape route. He told senior colleagues he was suffering from stress and, quite tellingly, stated he no longer wanted to carry a gun.
Which reads like an attempt to preemptively minimize his official role and reduce future scrutiny.
Exactly, disengaging from the force. But his immediate focus was on destroying the physical evidence, leading to some truly disturbing actions.
This is the part about Hode's Wood.
On the 5th of March, just hours after the murder, Cousins purchased and filled a petrol container. He returned to Hode's Wood, and this is where the sheer inhumanity is laid bare. He burned Everard's body inside an old refrigerator he had on his land.
And he continued to manage the disposal of the remains over the next few days.
He did. On the 7th of March, he purchased 2 large builder's bags from B&Q, a seemingly innocuous household purchase. He returned to the wood and used one of those heavy-duty bags to dispose of her remains in a pond.
And he didn't even put them on his own land.
No, he placed them about 100 meters away from his own plot, probably thinking the proximity would confuse investigators.
But the police investigation was moving faster than he could cover his tracks.
They were utilizing that detailed timeline, tracking the hire car, and analyzing all the phone data. The breakthrough came on the 10th of March.
The discovery.
Yes, search teams discovered human remains in that large builder's bag in Hode's Wood. Everard's identity was confirmed via dental records 2 days later, on the 12th of March.
And Cousins, sensing the net was closing, had reported himself sick on the 8th of March.
Correct. The arrest followed quickly. He was arrested at his home in Deal on the 9th of March on suspicion of kidnapping, and then rearrested for murder the next day.
And the investigation also revealed a last-ditch, desperate digital cover-up.
Absolutely. About 40 minutes before his actual arrest, at 7:47 p.m. on the 9th of March, Cousins attempted to wipe all the data from his mobile phone. He performed a factory reset.
Which basically confirms his guilt and his intent to destroy evidence.
It does. When initially interviewed, his lies were predictable, but then he quickly moved to this elaborate, almost cinematic, concocted story.
What does he claim?
Initially, he just played dumb, claiming not to recognize Everard from a photograph, but when confronted with the irrefutable evidence, he pivoted.
To this wild narrative.
He claimed he was in financial trouble after paying for sex in Folkestone, and was subsequently blackmailed by a ruthless gang of Eastern Europeans. He alleged this gang threatened his family and demanded he deliver another girl, after he had supposedly underpaid a prostitute weeks earlier.
It's a bizarre, convoluted effort to shift blame.
Illustrating the extent of his deceit while in custody.
We must also note the unusual details surrounding his time in custody.
That's right. Cousins was twice hospitalized on the 11th and 12th of March after sustaining head injuries while alone in his cell. This incident became part of the procedural record of the case, leading up to him being formally charged with kidnapping and murder on the 12th of March.
By the summer of 2021, the legal path became clear due to the weight of forensic evidence against him.
On the 8th of June 2021, Cousins entered guilty pleas for kidnapping and rape and admitted responsibility for Everard's death.
And then the murder plea.
Just over a month later, on the 9th of July, he pleaded guilty to murder during a video link appearance from Belmarsh Prison. Our sources noted the specific image of him during that appearance, shaking slightly and keeping his head down.
As if the weight of the undeniable reality had finally settled.
It appeared so.
The sentencing in September 2021 was extraordinary. Lord Justice Fulford handed down a whole life order. We need to explain why this was such a monumental decision in the UK legal landscape.
A whole life order is the rarest and most severe sentence available in the UK. It's reserved for crimes of exceptional gravity.
And it means exactly what it says. Life imprisonment with no eligibility for parole or release.
Ever. And Lord Justice Fulford's sentencing rationale was groundbreaking. He explicitly cited Cousins' use of his position as a police officer to detain Everard as the vital factor that made the seriousness of the case exceptionally high.
So it wasn't just the fact that he committed murder, but that he exploited the trust inherent in the state.
Absolutely. Fulford stated that Cousins' crime betrayed the very nature of public service and undermined the rule of law itself. This classification placed his crime alongside only a handful of others deemed so severe, usually mass murders or serial killings of children, that the perpetrator must be locked away for life.
So the sentence was a clear statement by the judiciary.
A very clear statement that the abuse of institutional power for criminal gain is a distinct category of evil.
Did Kasana's attempt to challenge that severity?
He did. Kazans lost his appeal against the whole life order in July 2022. The Court of Appeal upheld the initial ruling, cementing the judicial view on the abuse of office.
And the legal scrutiny continued regarding his prior conduct.
Yes, which led to new charges related to his pattern of non-contact sexual offending.
The indecent exposure incidents.
Exactly. In March 2022, he was charged with 4 counts of indecent exposure related to incidents in early 2021, and he later pleaded guilty to 3 incidents that took place in Kent in 2020 and 2021.
So this legal closure on his prior offenses confirmed for the public and the inquiry that his crime was not an isolated snap moment.
No, it was the peak of a long, unchecked trajectory of sexual deviance.
And as we touched on earlier, the legal fileout extended to his colleagues, revealing a highly toxic internal environment.
We saw accountability for the wider culture. In November 2022, 2 of Cousins' colleagues, PC Jonathan Cobbin and former PC Joel Borders, who were part of a WhatsApp group chat that included Cousins, they were jailed.
What for?
For sending multiple counts of grossly offensive messages that were racist, homophobic, misogynistic, and ableist. This group chat environment, which Cousins was an active participant in, provided a crucial snapshot of the deep-seated cultural toxicity within certain pockets of the Met.
And finally, there was the controversy surrounding whether he could still claim any police pension.
That debate continued well into 2023 concerning whether he might still be entitled to pensions from his pre-Met service, like the CNC.
But the Med pension was stripped.
Yes, the Mayor of London successfully applied to have his Metropolitan Police pension stripped. He had already been dismissed from the service with immediate effect in July 2021, but this final legal action ensured that he could not benefit financially from the years he spent in service.
The years which culminated in such an egregious betrayal.
Precisely.
We now arrive at the most crucial section of this deep dive, the systemic failures. This case became less about one monster and more about the institutional complacency that allowed that monster to thrive for years.
That is the devastating conclusion that the Angelini inquiry reached. The report, which was commissioned to investigate how Kazantzos was permitted to serve, was published in February 2024.
And its findings were stark.
Uncompromising. It found Kazantzan had an extensive history of alleged sexual offenses prior to the murder, and the inquiry unequivocally stated that he should never have been a police officer.
Never have been a police officer.
Yeah.
I mean, that implies failures at the very point of entry and throughout his entire career progression.
It does.
Let's detail those red flags that were so disastrously missed over the years.
We need to go back over a decade. The first known incident dates to 2008. Radio presenter Emma B. came forward, recounting how she reported Cousins exposing himself in an alley in Greenwich.
And her claim was that when she reported it, the police
allegedly laughed at her. This suggests an initial failure to treat a serious offense with the necessary gravity, and a potential cultural bias toward dismissing these non-serious sexual offenses.
Then, even while he was a serving authorized firearms officer with the CNC, there was another incident in Kent.
In 2015, yes. Kent police received a report of a man in a car in Dover, naked from the waist down. The source material suggests there was potentially enough information within police systems, maybe linked to vehicle or residency records, to connect that report to Cousins,
who was active in the area and a serving officer at the time.
Right. Yet the report was filed, and no proactive action or intervention was taken.
And the most egregious failure happened just days before he kidnapped Sarah Everard.
Yes, the final and loudest alarm bell was ignored. Cousins was actually questioned about reports on the 20th of February 2021, just 4 days before the murder, that he had indecently exposed himself at a McDonald's in Swanley, Kent.
And the officers who handled that were investigated.
They were. The Independent Office for Police Conduct, the IOPC, launched a subsequent investigation into whether they followed protocols. The inquiry's conclusion that he should never have been hired underscores that had any of these 3 incidents been properly recorded, investigated, and reviewed during vetting, his career in the police would have been terminated.
This continuous failure to act on non-contact sexual offenses is not just bad policing. It highlights a critical criminological blind spot.
It does. Criminologists cited in our sources emphasize the critical connection between these offenses. Studies suggest that up to 10% of men who commit indecent exposure later escalate to commit physical sexual offenses.
So the key insight here is that the mindset, the gratification through power and fear, is a predictive indicator.
Yes, even if it's non-contact. It's a predictor of escalation.
So, the argument is that if the police had taken these so-called minor sexual offenses seriously, They wouldn't just have been preventing petty crime. They could have been intervening in a trajectory that led to murder.
Exactly. The experts stressed that the systematic underinvestigation and dismissal of non-contact offenses meant that Cousins' trajectory of sexually motivated behavior was allowed to continue unabated and officially shielded by his uniform.
So the Angelini inquiry places the blame across multiple forces.
It explicitly found that multiple forces, Kent, the CNC, and the Met, missed these opportunities across his vetting processes, leading to the conclusion that his crimes were the culmination of a trajectory of sexually motivated behavior and offending.
Beyond the vetting failures, the case revealed a toxic culture within the Met that enabled someone like Cousins to exist without fear of accountability.
The inquiry peeled back layers of institutional toxicity. We mentioned the offensive WhatsApp group, which resulted in the jailing of Cobbin and Borders. That was just the surface.
There were more involved.
5 officers in total were investigated for sharing grossly offensive material with Cousins before the murder, indicating a wider circle of complicity in this poisonous culture.
And crucially, the women within the force felt silenced.
That's the most alarming cultural symptom. Female officers reported to the press that they felt entirely unable to report concerning behavior by their male colleagues.
They feared reprisal.
Reprisal, dismissal, or simply being laughed at, a culture of fear and silence that protects the perpetrators and isolates the victims.
And even the investigation of the final red flag, that 2021 exposure incident, showed a failure of professional standards.
Former PC Samantha Lee, the officer responsible for investigating the February 2021 exposure allegations, was found guilty of gross misconduct for failing to properly investigate those incidents. She was later dismissed. Her subsequent defense that she was made a scapegoat for wider issues within the Met only reinforced the perception that systemic rot, not just individual error, was at fault.
And the unprofessional behavior continued even into the aftermath of the murder.
Yes. There were multiple instances of internal misconduct during the investigation. In November 2024, 3 officers were found guilty of gross misconduct for viewing confidential files related to Everard's murder without any legitimate policing purpose.
Just looking at the files.
Yes. One officer was dismissed and another received a final written warning. This breach of privacy and professional duty, even surrounding a colleague's horrific crime, demonstrated a deep lack of respect for professional standards.
So, given this catastrophic catalog of failures, the Angelini inquiry had to propose a revolutionary fix. What was the core thrust of its 16 recommendations?
The recommendations were designed to ensure that everything possible is being done to prevent those entrusted with the power of the office of constable from abusing that power.
So a heavy focus on vetting.
Very heavy. On mandatory, rigorous, and continuous vetting throughout an officer's career, not just at entry. They stressed the need for a national standard that ensures non-contact sexual offenses are flagged and investigated with the highest priority.
And what immediate policy changes came out of the inquiry?
Following the inquiry's damning conclusions, the Home Secretary announced a crucial policy change. Police officers charged with certain offenses would be automatically suspended from duty.
Which builds on an earlier policy.
Yes, a 2023 policy that required automatic suspension for officers facing findings of gross misconduct. The overarching goal is to shift the standard of care. If there is a serious doubt about an officer's integrity, they must immediately be removed from public-facing duty.
The moment the public learned the killer was a serving police officer, the conversation immediately moved from grief to, well, a national emergency. The political reaction was one of stunned admission.
The political class recognized the severity of the crisis of confidence. Home Secretary Priti Patel quickly stated that every woman should feel safe to walk on our streets without fear of harassment or violence.
And the mayor of London was just as blunt.
Yes, Sadiq Khan was forced to admit the uncomfortable truth. London streets were simply not safe for women or girls.
Patel also responded with promises of legislative change, acknowledging that existing laws might not address the daily threat women face.
She announced consideration of new laws, including the push to make public harassment a specifically defined crime. This showed recognition that the problem was structural, not just about extreme violence, but about the pervasive sense of unease and fear women experience daily. The political establishment was under immense pressure to deliver tangible change.
But the defining moment of institutional failure in the immediate aftermath came from the police themselves, with their highly controversial safety advice. Let's unpack that response.
This advice, released by the Met after Cousins' sentencing, caused an immediate public explosion. The Met suggested that if a lone police officer stopped someone and they felt uncomfortable, they should consider.
Shouting out to a passerby, running into a house, knocking on a door, waving a bus down.
Or, if you are in the position to do so, calling 999.
This advice was met with furious criticism. Why did it land so badly?
It failed on so many levels. Firstly, it placed the burden of verification and safety entirely onto the potential victim. Secondly, and more importantly, it completely ignored the central, terrifying fact of the case. Peasants was the police officer.
Right.
He used his warrant card and uniform to gain compliance. Shouting for help when stopped by a uniformed, authoritative figure could be seen as resisting arrest.
And legally, if you run away from a legitimate police officer, you risk charges. The Met's advice, therefore, was simultaneously impractical and potentially criminalizing for the person trying to protect themselves.
Exactly. It demonstrated a profound lack of understanding of the emotional and practical reality of the situation. It was a clear example of institutional self-protection over public responsibility.
And this perception was tragically reinforced by comments from a regional police commissioner.
North Yorkshire Police Fire and Crime Commissioner Philip Allott made comments suggesting women needed to be more streetwise about when they can be arrested.
The definition of victim blaming.
It was. He suggested that women needed to be better educated about police procedure rather than the police needing to ensure their officers are trustworthy. This comment led to an immediate, massive vote of no confidence and forced his resignation and a public apology.
So the intensity of that reaction proved that the public would no longer tolerate institutional responses that deflected blame.
Not at all.
The public outcry did spur action on new safety technology, leading to the highly publicized proposal of the N88 phone service.
The BT chief executive came forward with plans for a Walk Me Home phone service, which Priti Patel actively supported. The concept was powerful. Using the proposed number 888, the service would employ GPS tracking and send immediate alerts
To emergency contacts and the police if a user failed to arrive at their destination.
Yes, it was heralded as a tangible, high-tech safety measure born directly from the tragedy.
A promise of a real practical solution. But the source material gives us the grim final chapter of that proposal.
Despite the high-profile support and promises of rapid implementation, the proposed 888 service was ultimately canceled by BT in April 2023.
It was just canceled.
Quietly shelved. And this failure became a new point of contention, that the promised practical safety measures designed to reassure the public disappeared once the intense media spotlight on the case began to fade.
Meanwhile, the formal governmental and police reviews did move forward, focused on deep cultural shifts.
Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary and Fire and Rescue Services, HMI-CFRS, published a comprehensive report. It found inconsistencies at every level in how police forces respond to violence against women and girls, or VAWG.
And the recommendation was radical.
It was an urgent and radical refocus and shift in the priority given to VAWG offenses, suggesting they be treated with the same seriousness as counterterrorism operations.
That is a massive operational shift to prioritize domestic violence and street harassment on par with national security threats.
It speaks to the severity of the structural problem they identified. And the public agreed. A YouGov poll conducted shortly after the murder found that 76% of women believed police culture required radical change.
And crucially, nearly half reported a decrease in their trust in the police.
47%, yes. A measurable decrease in trust specifically following Everard's murder.
This level of broken trust necessitated the Met looking inward, leading to the launch of their own review.
Exactly. The Met initiated a comprehensive review of professional standards and internal culture, headed by Baroness Casey of Blackstock. This review examined everything: recruitment, training, vetting procedures, and the organizational culture that allowed Cousins to operate, echoing the deep systemic issues later identified by the Angelini inquiry.
They knew they needed an independent, critical eye to even begin to rebuild legitimacy.
They had no other choice.
The frustration, the grief, and the simmering anger over the systemic failures didn't just stay in policy papers or polls. It exploded into public demonstrations, which then became a fresh source of conflict with the very police force under scrutiny.
Nationwide vigils were spontaneously organized for the 13th of March 2021 by the newly formed campaign group Reclaim These Streets. This was an organic public reaction, but it immediately ran into the wall of COVID-19 restrictions.
Despite the public mood, the restrictions were severe, meaning large gatherings were illegal.
The Home Secretary urged police chiefs to stop large gatherings, citing the Coronavirus Act 2020. The organizers of Reclaim These Streets attempted to challenge the ruling in court to proceed lawfully, but they lost.
So many official events were canceled.
Or moved online, yes. However, the momentum for public assembly was too great to stop entirely.
Vigils still proceeded in multiple cities. Birmingham, Edinburgh, Leeds, and small symbolic gatherings occurred in London. But the emotional energy was centered on Clapham Common, near the abduction site.
Hundreds of people, predominantly women, gathered there to mourn, and the vigil attracted attention far beyond political activists.
Absolutely. Hundreds gathered throughout the day to lay flowers and pay respects at the bandstand. In a powerful symbolic gesture that highlighted the deeply personal nature of the tragedy, Catherine, the Duchess of Cambridge, attended privately.
And Kensington Palace released a statement.
They said she attended because she remembers what it was like to walk around London at night before she was married. It was a gesture of solidarity from the very top of the social structure.
But as evening fell, the gathering turned into a confrontation with the Met.
By 6:00 p.m., a large crowd had assembled near the bandstand, hearing impromptu speeches. The Metropolitan Police moved in quickly and forcefully to break up the crowd, leading to 4 arrests for public order offenses and breaching the Coronavirus Act.
And the resulting images, they were shocking. Officers grappling with women, handcuffing them, and footage of officers trampling the flowers that had been laid in tribute. It triggered an immediate and furious new wave of national anger.
It was a disastrous moment for the Met's public image. Political leaders across the spectrum condemned the police response. Labor leader Keir Starmer, Prime Minister Boris Johnson, and Mayor Sadiq Khan all called the response deeply disturbing and neither appropriate nor proportionate.
Yet Cressida Dick, the Met Commission at the time, staunchly defended the actions. She refused calls to resign and argued that the police were enforcing necessary COVID public health measures because hundreds of people were packed tightly together.
This clash immediately led to an official review of the policing action, but the findings were contradictory and confusing.
They were. The HMICFRS published its review in March 2021. It initially found that the police had acted appropriately and were not heavy-handed and were justified in their stance regarding COVID regulations. But even this sympathetic review had to conclude that the operational handling was a public relations disaster that severely undermined confidence.
And the most important finding of that review was the legal interpretation.
Yes, the HMICFRS report noted that the Met had incorrectly interpreted the coronavirus restrictions. They had treated all demonstrations during a Tier 4 lockdown as inherently unlawful, which was not the case under the legislation. This opened the door for legal challenges.
Because the police were operating on a flawed legal premise.
A premise that was immediately challenged in court by the organizers.
So 4 members of Reclaim These Streets took legal action.
They did, arguing that the decision to prohibit the vigil breached their human rights to freedom of speech and assembly. It was a direct challenge to the authority and legal basis of the Met's command decision.
And the High Court sided with the organizers, further humiliating the Met.
In March 2022, the High Court delivered a landmark judgment ruling that the Met's decisions were not in accordance with the law. They confirmed that the actions taken in the run-up to the event breached the organizers' human rights.
And the Met's appeals failed.
They tried to appeal twice, but were refused permission by both the High Court and the Court of Appeal, confirming the police force had acted unlawfully in its handling of the vigil.
What was the final tangible consequence for the police and the arrested attendees?
Initially, the Crown Prosecution Service prosecuted 6 attendees for breaking COVID laws, and 3 were even fined in private trials. However, following the overwhelming legal and public pressure, the CPS discontinued all cases in August 2022.
And finally, the Met was forced to apologize and pay damages to the women they had arrested and handcuffed.
In September 2023, the Met finally apologized and paid substantial damages. This included Patsy Stevenson, whose photograph being handcuffed by 2 male officers became the defining image of the vigil's conflict, and Jennifer Edmonds, who received £10,000 in damages.
It was an official admission of fault.
And it confirmed the public's perception that the policing of the vigil was not only mishandled, but fundamentally unlawful, compounding the sense of institutional failure that the murder had initiated.
This entire saga, the betrayal of trust, the long trajectory of missed warning signs, the victim-blaming advice, and the unlawful suppression of public grief, It shows how quickly a single crime can become a catalyst for deep systemic examination.
It became the litmus test for institutional accountability in the UK. The profound difference in this case, as our source material notes, is critical. Unlike most documented cases of women killed by serving or former police officers since 2009, where the victims were usually known to the officer.
Sarah Everard was killed by a
stranger who specifically used his authorized power to execute the crime.
That unique betrayal, the weaponization of the uniform, is what moved this case beyond individual criminality into a national crisis of confidence.
It forced the UK to confront the reality that when the very individuals tasked with enforcement become the perpetrators, the entire foundation of public safety collapses. The Angelini inquiry was absolutely right. Cousins should never have been a police officer.
So the systemic overhaul in vetting, in culture, and in accountability is now not just a policy recommendation, but a necessity for the survival of police legitimacy.
It has to be.
We've seen the details of the inquiry, the extensive recommendations for institutional reform, and the history of unchecked sexual offending by cousins across 3 separate forces. These changes require not just new policies on paper, but a complete cultural shift within thousands of officers.
And the difficulty lies in implementing changes that penetrate the institutional culture. It's about changing hearts and minds, not just checking boxes on a vetting form.
So we've laid out the facts, the criminal justice process, and the painful path of institutional reckoning. For you, the curious learner who has explored every facet of this difficult deep dive, the question remains. Given the finding that cousins should never have been a police officer and the detailed recommendations for systemic overhaul, what is the most challenging change in culture, vetting standards, or accountability measures that the UK police must successfully implement to truly rebuild public trust and ensure that the badge means protection, not peril?
I mean, is it fixing the initial hiring process, or is it changing the internal culture that allows bad actors to hide? It's a crucial distinction.
And I think it is the cultural change, which is always the hardest.
It is. It's the challenge of ensuring that every officer, from the bottom to the top, truly believes that prioritizing the investigation of non-contact sexual offenses is as vital to national security as terrorism, and making sure they act on that belief.
A tough but absolutely essential thought to take away from this profound and deeply important deep dive.